It's a pleasure to be here, and first time in Victoria on Vancouver Island, and I wish I was staying longer. What can I say? Before really getting into the talk, I just wanted to, although the title of the talk had the climate emergency in it, climate change emergency, I just wanted to mention that climate change induced by human activity is not the only issue with regard to the environment. There are so many environmental issues that are happening simultaneously, including pollution of water, as you know, the sea, of fresh water, of our rivers, pollution of soil, by the way, which is near and dear to my heart for lots of reasons, which we can talk about if you'd like to, and pollution of the air, of course, and pollution of you and me. I mean, we are polluted. You can tell if you want to by having your urine and blood analyzed, and the chances are awfully good that the laboratory will find detectable limits of a number of chemicals, potentially pesticides, but also BPA, other plasticizers, and flame retardants, etc. Either the chemical itself or byproducts. 95% of the U.S. population that was tested had BPA in their bodily fluids, if you will. So we are actually, I mean, it's next to impossible, as I think you probably know, to buy food that hasn't touched plastic. And there's plastic in so much of what we do. I don't want to scare people and say, I've got to stop eating because I can't. But just keep it in mind. We have many environmental problems, and they are affecting us directly in many different ways. Our health and obviously the health of other organisms as well on the planet. So many explanations have been given for the acceleration of damage that's being done to the Earth. And I want to also make clear that I'm very well aware that there has been damage done to the Earth, to the ecology of the Earth, to the environment, by human beings many, many years ago. Okay, even literally thousands of years ago. The book, I believe, starts or has a very early part of the book. There's a quote from Plato in which he talks about the erosion that occurred. He doesn't use that term near Athens, and the soil that rushed down to the valleys. And now that the springs have dried up because the water just rushes off without percolating into the soil, and you have a barren landscape, which is, if you've been to the Mediterranean and to Greece and to parts of the Middle East, you've probably seen the limestone outcroppings of formerly soil-covered hills. So this is not new. But there is certainly something that's very new that has occurred, and that is that we are doing damage on a global basis, not just in Greece or not just in Lebanon, let's say, or not just in wherever it was. Perhaps the Mayan civilization. There have been implicated human activity in that downfall. What's happening now is really on a global basis. We are affecting the whole Earth, and I'll get a little bit into also a little bit why that is different. But there are a lot of people who've given explanations as to what's causing this, and therefore they derive out of that explanations, or not explanations, but let's say suggested remedies. Okay, what do we do about it? And so one of them, and I've run into these people by internet and talked, and it's all been very friendly, who believe there are just too many people in the world. That the problem is too many people. And the answer to the problem, in their opinion, is we have to drastically reduce the population of the world. And it has to be done, of course, they would say in a humane way, although I don't exactly see how that's possible, but that it has to happen immediately, and actually, in a way, they're right, but they're wrong. It turns out that if you look at the resource use on the global basis, about 60% of the total resources that are used every year in the world are used by the wealthiest 10% of the people. So if we have a population problem, if we do, which I would say that is not the real issue, the problem is there's too many rich people living too high, okay? The problem isn't too many poor people. And the remedy of the people, by the way, who are concerned about too many people in the world is we've got to have birth control in Africa, we've got to, et cetera, et cetera. It's usually dealing with poor people. And obviously, I mean, women should have, and men should have access to birth control and to reproductive health and advice, et cetera. And that should be a human right. That goes without saying, in my opinion. But that is not the solution to the problem, to try to decrease the number of people in poor countries, because they are not contributing to the problem. You could eliminate, by humane ways, the poorest 1 billion people in the world, and we would have all the same problems we have right now, with minor exceptions, because they are contributing next to nothing to global warming, to CO2 evolution. They are contributing next to nothing to the problems of use, of depletion of natural resources, etc. So that is not the problem. Well, there are other people who say, well, it's just human nature. We are just too darn greedy as a species, and we just don't care about the future, and there's really nothing that can be done about it. So the solution is obvious. You do nothing. There are a significant number of people, and I've run across these. I mean, these are all arguments I've heard, by the way. I'm not making anything up here. That the problem is our philosophy, that we have a perpetual growth philosophy, or a paradigm, if you prefer. And what we need is to have a new philosophy. Like, we're going to go to philosophy class at the university here, and we're going to get a new philosophy, and everybody's going to get a new philosophy, and everything's going to be fine. And so that is an argument that I hear. I hear people talk about it, and I have a person I'm fairly friendly with who says, I really think the problem is that human beings have a domination ethic, and we need new ethics if we're going to, solve the problem. And by the way, I think we do need new ethics, but I don't think that is the root of the problem. Then there are a significant number of people, and very good people, who feel that really the problem is the externalities, what economists refer to as the externalities of our economic system, of capitalism. And there are many social and environmental externalities. These are things that just happen. A business doesn't want it to happen necessarily, but they're causing pollution by functioning the way they're functioning. And these externalities can be controlled by regulations. They can be controlled by some supposedly, corporations may do it just because they're going to be nice to us, but we should be using market-based approaches or laws or regulations to resolve these issues. Now, that would be the answer to all these various and sundry problems we see. Get the government to pass a law, or set up some trading system, a free market system to do that. And there are many problems with that, and there are many absurdities that occur with that, by the way, with taking that approach. But nowadays, of course, all businesses are green. It's hard to find a business that says, oh no, I'm not a green business, or I'm not a sustainable business. Everybody wants to be sustainable. Everybody wants to be green. And so green capitalism is the answer. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but the CEO of BP in 1999 received the award for individual environmental leadership from the UN Environmental Program for his leadership in promoting environmental causes. Under his leadership, BP had adopted the slogan "Beyond Petroleum." They were actually getting interested a little bit in biofuels, and had acknowledged that greenhouse gases might cause global warming. In 2000, Brown was also awarded First Magazine's first award for responsible capitalism for his advances in social responsibility. Brown and BP became symbols of a new green corporate world. Now, Brown resigned from BP after this explosion in Texas in 2005, where 15 workers were killed and 180 injured. And it was before, of course, the oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. He was no longer CEO. But what he set in motion really was to downplay the safety efforts of the company, which had really disastrous results. This is an example of a leader of green capitalism. You've got Walmart. You've got Walmart in Canada, right? Yeah. Walmart has made a commitment in 2005. It was going to become 20% more efficient by 2013, energy efficient, through cutting the carbon emissions associated with its current stores by 2.5 million metric tons. And this, it sounds pretty good, they're going to really become environmental stewards. But by 2006, that's the next year, Walmart's carbon emissions had already risen by its own emission by another 9%. The new stores that were being added in 2007 alone were expected to consume enough electricity to add 1 million metric tons to the overall greenhouse gas emissions, exceeding any efficiency gains. Wes Jackson, who's well known in the States, I don't know if Wes is known here, an environmentalist and agricultural scientist, put it this way. He said, when the Walmarts of the world say they're going to put in different light bulbs and get their trucks to get by on half the fuel, what are they going to do with the savings? They're going to open up another box store somewhere. It's just nuts. In the end, Walmart, of course, is an economic juggernaut, and it's going to do more or less what it wants to do. There is a whole push towards various schemes of trading emission rights, the right to emit pollution, or offset schemes also, which I'll talk about a little bit too. This, again, is trying to deal with the externalities of capitalism. Well, I wouldn't say, this is an important example. Europe dominates the $144 billion a year, this is in 2009, greenhouse gas market, okay? A primary offset purchased by many European companies has been for Chinese firms to destroy HFC 23, hydrofluorocarbon 23, a byproduct of producing HFC 22, which is used as a refrigerant. So one molecule of this gas they're going to destroy in the atmosphere has about 10,000 times the heat retention of one molecule of CO2. There is plenty of evidence that in some plants in China, they've been producing more refrigerant than they need in order to get paid to destroy the HFC 23. In other words, it has become a profit stream for these companies to get this money from Europe so the Europeans can continue to pollute and emit CO2. Everybody with me on this? Okay. So there are also many examples of offsets called Green Gone Wrong, which is quite interesting. And she actually went and visited sites. One of them was where most of the organic sugar is grown for processed foods, probably in Canada, but for the United States, is in Paraguay. And she visited the organic farms there. She visited offset programs in India, biofuel programs in India, and it was remarkable. There is really little oversight for what's going on in these places, and where so there were supposed to be a bunch of trees planted so that somebody could fly in good conscience and buy offsets, where they'll plant some trees. Many of them had died, and lots of problems. If you want to learn about that, I'd suggest taking a look at her book. But what she wrote in her book, sort of to summarize what she had learned by doing the research that she did, is that the outcome of industrial organic food, commodity biofuels, and CO2 offsetting isn't authentic protection and stewardship of the environment. What's transpiring is a tailoring of environmental crises, so they can be dealt with in ways today's economic and political structures deem the least threatening to the status quo. In other words, these are schemes really being devised so to allow companies and corporations to basically do what they've been doing. And this is certainly not solutions. If any of you have not seen the website cheatneutral.com, write it down and visit the website. If you would like to cheat on your partner, you can pay £2.50 to a British company that will find somebody who will promise they will not cheat, and so the net cheating in the world will not go up, okay? And they have sort of a disclaimer, you really should try to lower your cheating, but if you must, we have this available for you. It's hysterical, and it's worth taking a look at. And they did it, obviously, as a spoof on the offset program, but the video that they had on there, I don't know if it's still on there now, the website's still active, is they went and talked to people on the street, and some people said that's ridiculous, and other people said, hey, that's not a bad idea, I can cheat with a clear conscience, because somebody else isn't going to. Well, okay. So then there's another line of thought which says really all we have to do is we're buying the wrong kind of products, and we have to buy green products. If we all bought green, we could solve this problem. Get rid of everything you've got now and buy a whole bunch of new stuff, but all the gadgets and clothing and food and whatever you're buying, buy it so-called green, made by corporations who say they're green, and that's going to be the end of it, which is really no answer at all. Most of these corporations are not particularly green, and purchasing more stuff is not the answer, as I'll talk about. Then there are people who really just don't say why they feel this has been caused, but their answer is geoengineering. That is engineering on a global scale, where they want to put one of the suggestions is to spray sulfate particles into the atmosphere so that they'll reflect the light from the sun, some of the light, and that will then dissipate some of the heat, and therefore global warming will be lessened. There are others who want to blow up white balloons and have them in the ocean, giant balloons, to try to overcome the problem of the melting of the Arctic ice and other sea ice so that it will reflect light back into the atmosphere again. There are those who want to fertilize the ocean, and there was an experiment done recently. I don't know what the results were. It was done without any authorization by anyone, where a group of people dumped a whole bunch of iron into the water, which is a limiting element in certain parts of the ocean, to try to stimulate growth. The idea is you stimulate more algae growth, and that will use up more carbon dioxide. They'll die and sink to the bottom, and that'll be the end of it. Of course, there are organisms down below that decompose and give off CO2, but that's a whole other story. But basically what they're talking about is engineering on a huge scale. And once you start making experiments like that and doing things like that, you never know what the side effects are going to be. You never know what the secondary and tertiary effects are going to be. Okay. There are also, by the way, lots of low-tech solutions you should plant trees. There are people who are now getting paid for farmers to use practices that are going to store more organic matter in their soils, because organic matter is carbon. It's carbon with nitrogen and a few other elements as well. And so that is, one of the solutions, sort of low-tech solutions that we're going to do that. There are many others too. I'm just giving a sampling. So what's the difference between what's happened before and what's happening now? I talked about one of the differences. I'm talking about what's happened hundreds of years ago or thousands of years ago, what's happening now. And I mentioned one thing, which was, of course, now we're doing it on a much wider scale. It's really affecting the whole globe. And another issue, of course, is that the system has created a very unequal distribution of wealth, and is put in the hands of a relatively, well, it's not that small, but in a minority segment of the world's population, is put in the hands fabulous wealth, in which they are using to consume tremendous quantities of all of the Earth's resources. As I mentioned, some 60%, this is not my estimate, this is a staff of the World Bank estimate that some 60% of all of the resources that are used in the world are used by the wealthiest 10% of the people. So this is something different. We also have technologies now where we can do damage so much more quickly. There's humongous equipment for mining. I mean, literally, you stand. I don't know if you've seen pictures of some of these trucks, where if you stand like myself, I wouldn't even, my head wouldn't even be the top of the tire, of some of this equipment. It's just huge. And in West Virginia, I don't think it's happening here. There's mining where they call it mountaintop removal, where you blast the top of the mountain, you bring in bulldozers and push the rubble into the valleys, and you expose the coal seams to allow the work to proceed more easily than having to dig underground to get to the coal. So having the technologies to do this damage so much more easily than the technologies that existed before is also part of the problem. But now I come to what I think is really sort of the heart of the story, and that is we have an economic system that knows no bounds. It is compelled to grow perpetually. In other words, there is no way to stop it from growing, and it has to grow in order to be anywhere near anything you might call healthy. And not only that, it has to grow relatively rapidly, as I'll talk about. So, and there is no way for it to pay attention to the externalities. David Harvey has commented that if capitalism or capitalists were forced to pay for all of the externalities that are occurring, the whole system would go bankrupt because they're so phenomenal, so phenomenally costly to the environment and also the human externalities that occur. So, this, to me, as I said, is the central issue, I would say maybe the Achilles heel of our economic system as it affects the environment. Okay? There are other issues, and I'm not trying to cover the whole waterfront, if you will. I'm just trying to cover just the issues as it relates to the environment. And there's much confusion about capitalism, about what it means. At least nowadays we can talk about it in the United States. It used to be a dirty word, not a dirty word, but it was something that was never spoken about. It was the strangest thing. Here was an economic system that we were living in, and it was just unspoken. People talk about the free market. If anyone can find a free market, let me know, because I haven't seen one. The last free markets they really talked about were in agriculture, by the way, because for free markets you have to have many buyers and many sellers. And we used to have that in agriculture. And now in the United States, we still have quite a few farmers that are sellers, but we have very few buyers of products. So you can't have a free market in that situation. I won't get into how the government gets involved in all this and everything, but just from the basics, how a so-called free market should work, it's next to impossible when you don't have many buyers and many sellers for it to happen. So what propels the system? The whole system is based on the profit motive. That is the motivating force of capitalism. And it is taking some money, you've got some capital, you have some money, and you're going to invest it into some business. And you're going to buy labor and buy inputs and whatever, and you're going to make something. And you're making it in order to sell to somebody else over here for more money than you started with. Right? Seems elementary, right? You're not going to do it to end up with the same amount of money you started with, right? Anybody has $100,000 kicking around that wants to get back the same $100,000 in a year or two or three? Capitalists don't think that way. They're trying to enhance their capital. They're trying to accumulate more and more capital, without end, by the way. So this system is based on that. It's production to sell at a profit. It is not production to satisfy needs. If needs get satisfied, fine. If needs don't get satisfied, it's not really the concern of the corporation. If people in the United States, and I expect maybe in Canada, don't have enough food to eat, that's not the problem of the food companies, you see? Because people don't have a right to food, because food is a commodity, like any other commodity And if you have enough money, you can buy that commodity. And if you don't have enough money, too bad. There are charities around and maybe some government programs that will help you. Here we have in the United States, the country which I don't have to convince you has more than enough food to feed all its people. You have the phenomenon of some 40 to 50 million people who are in the food assistance program. You have literally something like 10 to 20 million children who are in families that are considered to be food insecure by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That is code word for hunger, which the U.S. Department of Agriculture decided to abolish approximately 5 or 6 or 7 years ago. They thought it was too charged a term to say that we had hungry people in the United States, but food insecure and very food insecure are the terms that are used now. If you want to read the report, it comes out every year, by the way, by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. So this is what the purpose of production is in this system. And I think most people understand that, although you might not think about it every day. I mean, I don't think about it every day. But what that means then is, in order to stay in business, you're in competition with somebody else. There's some other business here who's doing pretty much what you're doing. And you want to compete for market share with this other business that's over here. And the way you do it is by cutting costs. The way you do it is by advertising, by trying to convince people to buy your stuff and not their stuff. If it's the same, if it's different, that's fine. Buy my stuff and buy their stuff too. And so there's this massive advertising campaign that goes on, or massive sales effort, because it goes beyond advertising. It's why new models get brought out of cars every year, why the iPhone comes out with a new iPhone every week. I don't know how often it does, but I mean, that's the reason. They want to sell you more stuff. Planned obsolescence, or to make you think what you have is obsolete. It doesn't even have to be obsolete. As long as you feel that it's obsolete, that's okay, because you'll go out and buy a new one, which is better and improved, and it has some new features on it that you just can't live without for some reason. So the effort that goes on in this area is not something which is minuscule. It's believed that some 10% of the U.S. economy goes to the sales effort, thereabouts. We're talking about we're talking about well over $1 trillion a year. And you have situations where, I mean, some are absurd. A couple I talk about in the book, the diaper wars. There are now designer diapers. I mean, I didn't even know about this, where, this diaper, my diaper has some sort of pattern on it, and then this other company has a diaper that has some other pattern on it. And for those of us who shave, at least partially every day, there's razor wars. This razor is better because it's got more blades, or it can do this, it can do that, and the absurdity of some of these things are incredible. So in 1955, this is quite a few years ago, in the Journal of Retailing, a Victor Lebeau wrote the following. It's a very interesting article to read the whole article, and this is just a small excerpt from it. Our enormously productive economy demands that we make consumption our way of life, that we convert the buying and the use of goods into rituals, that we seek our spiritual satisfactions, our ego satisfactions in consumption. As we examine the concept of consumer loyalty, we see the whole problem of molding the American mind is involved here. Okay, so this is not the Journal of Marxist Studies. This is not the Journal of Eco-Socialism. These are people in 1955 talking to other people who are in the retailing sector or in the selling sector. And this is really about trying to create a more consumerist society, trying to convince people to buy more and to keep buying more. And when anything happens that's problematic in the society, that's what's suggested as an answer, is go out and buy. So this quest for accumulation of wealth is to partially enhance one's position as a wealthy person, and part of it is just the way the system works. You need to be actively accumulating. You need to be in competition with the other companies that are in competition with you. And if you're not doing this well, you're going to go out of business or be taken over. Now, a part of this is about greed. And I just want to talk a little bit about, that human beings, from babies on up, have all sorts of characteristics that are innate in us. And these go from the very good to the very bad. As you know, people are capable of murder. I mean, does not come of any news to you. But we have a tremendous range of characteristics. And what happens in this system, in capitalism, is it reinforces certain characteristics that we have, or certain tendencies that we have. Individualism, competition, greed, selfishness, exploitation of others, consumerism. These are all emphasized in the system. And if you're going to do well in the system, you better have those characteristics. And then, at the same time, other characteristics are downplayed, which are part of the human experience, which is cooperation, sharing, empathy, altruism, etc. I'm not saying that there aren't people that are altruistic in our society or in your society, but these are downplayed by the system. And what are brought out are these others that make you better at working the system and at competing in the system. And one of the things that's interesting, I came across an article just a little while ago before coming out here, sometime last week, but it came out a year ago in a fairly prestigious journal called the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. It's one of the top journals in the United States in the science area. And let me just read you the title of the article and a couple of quotes from it. Higher social class predicts increased unethical behavior. Everybody catch that? Higher social class, these people that we look up to, predicts increased unethical behavior. And they did a bunch of, first off, they cite the literature about this, and then they did a bunch of experiments on this that were kind of interesting experiments. And they evaluated social class in different ways and the ethical behavior in different ways too. But basically, and they tried to explain sort of why they thought this was happening. But individuals motivated by greed tend to abandon moral principles in their pursuit of self-interest. So I don't know if you have seen Wall Street, the movie, with, Do you remember? Almost everyone remembers Gordon Gekko, the fictional character, getting up and saying at this meeting, "Greed is good," except he says it better than that. Greed is good. And he's right. For capitalism, greed is good. If you're going to be a good capitalist, greed is very good. You have to have the juices flowing in you. You have to want to accumulate capital. You have to want to be in competition with other companies in order to survive. You have to thrive in that type of environment. So we have a system that promotes greed. 10 minutes left? That's all? My God. I haven't cleared my throat yet. So we have a system that, in order to really get ahead in the system, it promotes certain characteristics. Those characteristics are also associated with unethical behavior, which really shouldn't come as that much of a surprise to us because of what we've learned over the last 4 or 5 years, certainly since the Great Recession, as it's called in the United States. But the unethical behavior of the wealthy has been abundantly clear. The unethical behavior of politicians has become abundantly clear as well. So anyway, they go on to try to explain why they think it happens. And if you'd like to see the article, you can check it out. If you have a problem, send me an email, and I will get back to you on it. So there are people who've talked about, okay, this is a problem. This growth imperative of capitalism. The system has to grow. It's impelled to grow. Everything it does tries to encourage growth. I mean, that's consumerism. That's trying to export more, etc. So what we really need is no growth capitalism. Okay? Zero growth economy. And there are a number of environmentalists who have talked this way and have said that's really what we need. And the problem is that really it's an oxymoron. There is no such thing as no growth capitalism. When capitalism is not growing, it is in crisis. There are millions and millions of people unemployed. It has to grow in order to provide jobs As it grows, it's damaging the environment. So there is this issue here. Right now, the U.S. economy is growing about 2% a year, corrected for inflation. That's the gross domestic product. I mean, more or less. And that is not really good enough. That's why we still have not gotten back all the people who lost their jobs. There are still fewer people employed in the United States than were employed in 2007. And so what you really need, and what economists say, what you really need for a healthy economy is 3% or 4% growth a year. Just keep in mind, 1% growth a year, which is terrible, 1% growth a year in the real economy is a doubling of the economy in 72 years. A 2% growth is a doubling of the economy in 36 years. So we're not talking about the economy going up, in a third of a century by 5% or 10%. We're talking about a doubling. So this is the implication of it. So when the growth rate slows down, you have massive unemployment. When the growth rate speeds up, it's good for employment and terrible for the environment. And this is one of the conundrums, I would say, of capitalism with regard to the environment and with regard to people. So there certainly are things that can be done, okay, within the framework of the system that we're living in to clean up the environment. And there are things that have been done. We now have sewage treatment plants in Vermont, and I'm sure you have here too. When it used to be, the towns would just, no? Don't tell me. What?
Good comment. You nailed it.
What? Well, it used to be these small towns in Vermont, they just discharged the waste raw right into the river. I mean, this is... This is an aside. It's got to get me at least a couple of minutes on the time here. New York City used to discharge all of its waste into the Hudson River, most of it into the Hudson River, raw. They also then, when they put in treatment plants, they had to do something with the sludge, what's left over afterwards. And what they do is they take it in a barge out to off of Long Island, and they would dump it in the ocean. And there was an event where a lot of water, I don't remember exactly what it was, got pushed to the shore, and this sludge accumulated with all sorts of garbage in it on the shore. And there was a cartoon in the New Yorker magazine that had a young woman in a swimsuit, and it said, Miss Sludge on it, and she's standing on a Long Island beach with all this sludge accumulating there. Well, I don't know why I get into these asides, but anyhow, so rivers are a lot cleaner than they were in the 1950s, let's say. The air is cleaner than it was. I think you're aware that in London there were literally thousands of people dying in the 1950s from the air, from the pollution in the air, something like what's happening in Beijing now, perhaps even worse than that. And that has been cleaned up. So there are regulations that have been put in place that forced companies or forced towns to clean up their pollution. In some ways, landfills now, there are regulations governing what you can do, where you can put them, how they have to be lined, etc. So there are things that can be done. There are also some suggestions that have been made for the future, and one of the best ones that I've heard is Jim Hansen, who was the leading climate scientist for the United States government, who just retired. Very outspoken person and a very, very concerned about global warming. And Jim Hansen proposed a carbon tax, but the carbon tax would be such that all of it would be returned to the people, and it would be returned on an equal amount per capita. And he said they have to go together, because this way poor people don't suffer. As a matter of fact, they might actually get ahead because they tend to be lower users of carbon, okay, than our wealthier people. And so this was a proposal of Hansen's. Some people have picked up the carbon tax, and some have said, oh my God, we can get all this money, we can do all these things with it, we can fight wars more easily with it or whatever. Of course, the idea, though, that he had was that all of it gets returned to people, and it all gets returned on a per capita basis, and so that poor people are not harmed. Okay, so my argument is really that there are things that you can do better to make the environment somewhat safer in a capitalist society. And it has been done, so there's evidence of that. But if you want to get to the root of the problem, if you want to really solve the issue of global warming, if you really want to solve the issue of the depletion of non-renewable resources and the destruction even of some of the renewable resources, like the fisheries, the ocean fisheries, you need a different system. You need a different way of operating, a different way of relating to the environment, a different way of relating to one another. And I would say that what you need is a system in which communities, regions, and multi-regions really strive for the regulation of the economy as well as the politics by democratic means and profoundly democratic processes. What we have now is theoretically a political democracy, although I would argue that that is really not the case in the United States in any meaningful sense of the word, unless you count democracy being able to vote every so many years for people who are not that different on most of the issues. But we have no economic democracy whatsoever. There is no input of the people, of the community, about what gets built, how it gets built, what gets produced, where it gets shipped to, etc. And until that happens, until there is social control of the economy, I don't think that really you can solve this problem. And that you need an economy in which the purpose of the economy is to produce whatever it is produced to meet the needs of people. And I would say the basic needs of people. And I'm not just talking about food and clothing and housing and heat in the wintertime. I'm talking also about other things, like recreation is a need of people. Cultural activities is a need of people. I would say contact with nature is a need that we all have. There is a whole discussion going on about young people in the United States, maybe here too, suffering from nature deficit disorder. No, really. I mean, that's the term they use, and they mean it seriously. They mean that there are really serious ramifications for kids, being focused on all these electronic gadgets and not actually out there interacting with nature. So the purpose of production needs to become to meet our needs, not to produce a gadget or some service and then convince somebody to buy it so I can make a profit. Okay? There's a very big difference between those two. And once you start doing that, it's really impossible to do it without some sort of a planning system. And I think in my opinion, what's needed is a planning system which starts at the local level, where local communities decide, what do we need? What are our basic needs? And how can we satisfy them? I think also trying to be as self-sufficient as possible should be a goal. Doesn't mean you have to be self-sufficient in everything, but it would be nice to be able to supply in a reasonable distance from a city most of the food for the city and the energy that the people in the city need and other needs like that they have. So, and there are examples of this, by the way, where communities are doing this right now. But I think it needs to be put together in a system. I think economic equality. I think we're all going to have to live, if we're going to have an environmentally sound system, we're all going to have to live at a standard of living which is below what is considered to be a middle-class standard of living in the United States, whatever that means. And it's not clear exactly what that means. But it means, we're not all going to have the number of cars that we have. We're not all going to be able to, get an airplane and fly wherever we want to at any time. There will be limitations. And that means that we will be living at what I would consider, Evo Morales, the president of Bolivia, talked about, he said, we really shouldn't be talking about living better. He said better implies, it's going to improve and improve and improve. What we need to talk about is living well. And that needs to be our goal. And she's talking about the Bolivian government. And we have to define that. And that's a community definition. What does that mean? What does living well mean? We need to use ecological approaches to production, living, transportation. This is an area which I worked in. My professional career in agriculture was devoted to trying to improve and develop systems that were more ecologically sound for growing food. And we can do it in a very ecologically sound way, very different from the highly mechanized industrial farms that produce so much of the food. And so anyway, these ecological approaches really need to be integrated into everything that we do. And just lastly, which may seem to be a minor point, but to me it's an important one. You know, people think of labor efficiency as being very important, a very important goal. You know, we are increasing productivity in the United States by X% a year or X fraction of a percent a year. And that's good, and we've got to increase it even more. Well, why? You know, why do we need to? You know, labor productivity by itself is not a goal. In agriculture, for example, what should be a goal is, you know, how much can you produce in this area in an ecologically sound way in my field or in my garden? Not how many hours does it take me to produce it, because there are lots of people in the world that don't have jobs, or they don't have good jobs, or that are involved in agriculture. And if they get displaced by the industrial model of agriculture, what's going to happen to them? And let me just end with this, which may seem a little off, but it is related. There was an estimate made that by Samir Amin, who's a reasonably well-known social scientist, that all of the food in the world could be produced by 20 million highly mechanized farmers using, you know, pesticides and fertilizers. That sounds like a lot of people, but there are close to 1 billion people in the world who are engaged in farming in one way or another. So if that's true, what happens to the other 980 million people in the world? Okay? It's been suggested China, by the way, is trying to increase its farm size, and a Chinese academic wrote, well, what happens if every farm becomes 6.7 hectares on average, and each one has 3 workers, and he does the math of that, and he said, well, that would employ 50 million people. He says, but we have 300 million people who are working the land. So what is important is to find jobs for people that are productive and that they can work in an environmentally sound way, not just any jobs that destroy the environment. So anyway, what I'm talking about really is a whole different way of interacting with the economy. It's a different economy. It usually goes under the term of socialism or some sort of variant, but it's basically production for people, for their needs. And by the way, I consider one of the basic needs of people is a healthy environment. That is not a separate issue. That is one of our basic needs, because a healthy environment protects us and provides us with many of the things that we need for our existence. Okay, I better quit. Thanks. I have an article on the land grabs, on the 21st century land grabs, in which I try to put them into I put them, in my view, into perspective of the dispossessions that have occurred, starting with the enclosures in England and going through what happened with the Native Americans in the South. These just examples over time, not trying to be a history, but to show there have been different techniques over time that have been used. The land grabs that are going on now, actually, the Chinese are not the big players. You know, they really are projected that way. If people are interested in this, you can read the article when it comes out. Also in the article, there's a reference to landmatrix.com, I believe is the website. They have, I believe, the best information. You can search by country that is being grabbed. Land is being grabbed, and you can search by country that is doing the grabbing, and the primary partner and the secondary partner. And the Chinese are in the top 10, but the top 1 is the United States of America. Okay, this is not Africa. Okay, no, but this would include Southeast Asia as well, and also South America, etc. But it's mainly happening in Africa and Southeast Asia, with other happening in other locations too. So the Chinese are definitely not the main players. They're involved, and their involvement is not really as bad as, in my opinion, as some of the others. I think the projects that they've worked on have been actually more beneficial. The land grabs themselves are horrific, the implications of them. And not just in Africa, what's happening in Indonesia and Malaysia too, the burning of the forest. I'm talking now about Indonesia. I go back and forth to different parts of the world, and displacement of people who are surviving on those forests are literally being displaced. They're not farmers, but they've been hunting and gathering for literally millennia. And what's the purpose of it? And there, by the way, is to plant to oil palm trees to produce oil mainly for the European market so that they can have green biodiesel, biodiesel fuel made from oil palm. So there have been a lot of things that have come together to cause this land grab that's been going on. And we're talking literally, I mean, the estimates are range from like 30 to 70 million hectares over the last, I've forgotten what it is, 5 or 6 years, have been either purchased or under long-term agreement, which could be 50, 70 years, 90 years, by private capital and by sovereign wealth funds of countries such as Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. Some of that may be Chinese money, but some of it's money and private Chinese money. And so what's happened is there's been a unique combination of factors which is causing this. And part of it was the world food crisis. I go into it in the article, and I'm not going to go into it now, but part of it was the world food crisis, countries getting very scared about being able to feed their own people, so they're trying to buy or control land in other countries to grow food to ship back to there. In other words, they don't want to depend on the free market, okay, for their food. And then the biofuel craze has also been part of it. It's in Africa, it's the oil palm plantations, but also there's a crop called jatropha, which is not edible. And jatropha is an oil crop, oil seed crop, and it's fairly productive. And so some of the plantations that are going in they're growing jatropha, again, to ship mainly is for oil for the biofuels market. So there's been a unique combination, but actually there is, I think, a misunderstanding about the Chinese role in Africa. It is actually not anywhere near as bad as many other countries' roles. I'm not saying it's all good, but they're relatively low down as far as players go. I mean, there are examples. There are examples of people who are trying to do things differently. There are, and I hear that you have them here in Canada, there are the CSAs, Community Supported Agriculture Farms, where you have people who are farming for the purpose of growing food to feed people who are their neighbors, who live nearby. They're not growing the food in order to get a lot of money to be able to buy other farms to get bigger and bigger and bigger, okay? So they are operating within a capitalist framework, but I don't consider them to be a capitalist business. They are, in a way, a business. But that's just an example of a different way of interacting with humans, different way of interacting with the environment. Most of those are organic farms. So, I mean, there are some examples like this around, okay? But if you're talking about, politically, how do you do it? I really don't know. I don't have the answer to that. I wish I did. I think what happened with the suppression of the Occupy movement in the United States is very telling and very chilling also. This was no major threat to the United States government at all. And yet you had a coordinated effort by the federal government and by states and cities to shut it down, and they did. And there is a relatively low threshold of tolerance for active dissent. Okay, if you want to write something on your blog, go ahead. Right now, they'll know what you're writing because the National Security Administration is going to read it, and they'll keep tabs on you. But go ahead and do it. But to get a lot of people out there at a demonstration, they have developed techniques now for crowd control, for ways of dispersing demonstrations, There were demonstrations at the last Republican convention where they just rounded up everybody and brought them to jail. And they never charged them with anything. They later released them, but it really effectively destroyed the demonstration. And, everybody sort of went home, and so, it really is a problem. Now, the major focus that a lot of environmentalists are putting on right now is, as you're all aware, is in the area of fossil fuels and trying different, on college campuses in the United States, they're trying to get divestment from fossil fuel companies. And most of the people who are doing that understand that that's really not going to solve anything if all the colleges and universities in the United States took all of their portfolios and divested of the coal and the oil companies. That's really not going to change the system. They're aware of that, but in their frustration, they do that. Then there are people who sit, including Jim Hansen, by the way, who actually would sit in front of a coal train, to try to stop, the coal. Again, that's not going to stop it. So it's a long-winded answer to say I really don't know and I wish I did. I think we have to keep trying. We have to keep trying new techniques. I think the Occupy movement was fantastic. It opened up, just the whole issue of the 1%. It's you can talk about it now. Everybody knows what you're talking about in the United States. You can mention capitalism. People know about it. I don't know. There certainly, would be a minority, but it's interesting. There have been polls that have been done since the recession, since the Great Recession. Since that started at the end of 2007. There have been polls that have been done. Just what do you think about capitalism? Is it good or bad or socialism, whatever? And it's interesting that there are a lot of people who have negative feelings about capitalism. There's a person who had it was an art project in Times Square, where it was in sort of these flashing lights. I presume they flash. I don't know. Nice bulbs all around. It says capitalism works for me. Yes, no. Okay, and he had it up for a certain number of hours, and there were like 100 yeses and 120 noes. I don't know what it means. It means just who was passing by at the time. And he's going to set it up again some couple of days in October. But it's not meant as, obviously there's political in it, but it's meant as an art experience. But so I think that what's happening now, which I think is positive, is that at least we're talking about it. At least we're saying, there is a system called capitalism and we live in it. And I think we need to understand it, and we need to understand how it operates and what its sort of laws of motion are, and what is logic, what is the logic of the system, and so I would say it's a very small minority, okay, and also I don't think that we're going to have change by somebody saying here is the solution. I think we're going to have change by mass mobilizations and movements in which people are thinking and talking all the time and are working out the solution as they go. There's no blueprint you can put up. It's going to develop differently in different places. The future is going to develop differently in wherever, in Canada than in the United States, than in Venezuela, than in Mozambique or wherever. And so the people there are going to have to work it out as part of the struggle, as they're struggling for a better society. Thank you.